The Wilsons thought they'd found peace in Riverside Heights, until a backyard barbecue revealed their neighbor's true colors. When police arrived, called by a racist neighbor, they didn't know Jeremy Wilson was a police captain ready to expose the injustice. What he did next would shock even the most jaded. But let's start at the beginning. On a warm summer afternoon, the sun bathed the neatly manicured lawns and tree-lined streets of Riverside Heights in a golden glow. The Wilsons' new home stood out, not for being different, but for the energy that surrounded it. The two-story house with its freshly painted shutters and blooming garden beds now hosted its first gathering, a backyard BBQ to mark the family's fresh start in this exclusive neighborhood. In the backyard, Jeremy Wilson, a tall and broad-shouldered man with an air of authority, even in casual clothes, manned the grill. The savory aroma of sizzling burgers and ribs wafted through the air, mingling with the occasional pop of a cold soda can and the lively chatter of the Wilson family. His wife, Amelia, a woman whose warm smile could light up a room, balanced expertly between flipping skewers and helping their kids. 10-year-old Ellie and 7-year-old Mason set up lawn games. Their laughter echoed down the street as Mason's soccer ball rolled too far and Ellie chased after it, giggling. It was the kind of scene anyone might expect from a family settling into a new community, joyful, carefree, and inviting. But not everyone saw it that way. Across the street, Karen Hastings stood rigid behind the lace curtains of her picture-perfect colonial home. Her graying blonde hair was pinned neatly back, and her lips were pressed into a permanent frown. In one hand, she clutched her clipboard, a staple accessory for her self-appointed role as the president of the Neighborhood Watch. Karen's eyes darted between the barbecue grill, the smiling faces, and the unmistakable presence of a few more guests arriving through the Wilsons' side gate. The guests, like the Wilsons, were black. Her sharp intake of breath betrayed her growing irritation. "Another one of them moving in?" Karen muttered, her voice dripping with disdain as she turned her gaze toward her clipboard, as though expecting it to confirm her suspicions about the unsavory elements threatening her carefully curated neighborhood. The scene on her lawn was almost comical. Karen in her pressed khakis and floral blouse, squinting at the Wilsons through binoculars she pulled from her pocket. She watched as Jeremy flipped burgers, as Amelia handed plates to their laughing kids, as their friends greeted them with warm hugs. To Karen, it was chaos, not joy. Her thin fingers wrapped around her phone, nails tapping against the screen as she stormed to the window. "Enough is enough," she muttered. She dialed 911, adjusting her tone to feign concern. "Hello? Yes?" she began, her voice slow and deliberate. "I'd like to report a suspicious gathering at 204 Maple Drive." She paused dramatically, looking out her window with narrowed eyes. "They're playing loud music and I'm not sure what's going on, but it doesn't feel appropriate. They might be loitering or disturbing the peace. Could you send someone to check it out?" Satisfied, Karen hung up and stepped back from the window, folding her arms. A smug smile spread across her face. She felt certain she had done her duty, preserving the character of Riverside Heights. Outside, the smell of grilling meat and the sound of laughter carried on, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing from across the street. But soon, Karen thought, she'd show them. She'd make sure these newcomers understood that her neighborhood wasn't a place for their kind. Jeremy Wilson stood at the grill, flipping burgers with precision, the sizzle of meat hitting the flames momentarily masking the sound of distant car engines. His daughter, Ellie, tugged at his arm, her usually bright smile replaced by a look of unease. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's a police car outside." Jeremy looked up, his eyes narrowing as he spotted two uniformed officers stepping out of their patrol car. He exchanged a glance with Amelia, who stood by the picnic table arranging plates. She immediately sensed his unease. "Stay here, sweetie," Jeremy said, his voice calm but firm. He handed Ellie the spatula and wiped his hands on a towel before stepping forward. Amelia moved closer, her arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with a mix of curiosity and quiet defiance. The officers, young and visibly uncomfortable, approached Jeremy cautiously. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head, spoke first, avoiding direct eye contact. "We got a call about a noise complaint," he said, his tone hesitant. Apparently, there's an unauthorized gathering here. Jeremy raised an eyebrow, his expression equal parts annoyance and disbelief. Noise complaint? He asked, his voice measured but firm. We're just having a family BBQ. From across the street, Karen Hastings stepped out onto her front lawn, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her self-satisfied smirk was unmistakable. About time, she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Jeremy caught sight of her and shook his head slightly before turning back to the officers. One of them, clearly nervous now, looked Jeremy up and down, recognition slowly dawning. Sir, do you live here? Jeremy's jaw tightened as he reached into his back pocket, pulling out his badge. He held it up, his eyes fixed on the officer. I'm Captain Jeremy Wilson, he said, his tone cool, but carrying an undeniable edge of authority. I live here, with my family. And yes, this is my backyard. The officers' faces turned pale as the realization hit them like a freight train. Captain Wilson, one of them stammered. We didn't realize. You didn't realize what? Jeremy interrupted, his voice rising slightly, his composure beginning to crack under the weight of indignation. That a black man can own a home in this neighborhood without your suspicion? Or that you're being used as tools by a racist neighbor who doesn't like seeing people like me here? Karen's smug expression faltered. She started to step back toward her porch, but Jeremy wasn't done. He turned to her, his voice sharp and commanding. Ma'am, he said, making sure every neighbor within earshot could hear him. Would you like to explain why you felt the need to call the police instead of walking across the street and introducing yourself like a decent human being? Karen froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I just thought, she stammered, but Jeremy cut her off. You thought what? That seeing black families laughing in their backyard was a crime? He took a step closer, his eyes piercing. Let me tell you something, Mrs. Hastings. My family belongs here just as much as yours, and if you think for 1 second that I'll let your prejudice intimidate us, you're sorely mistaken. The neighborhood had grown silent, with curious eyes peeking out from windows and doorways. Amelia, now recording the interaction on her phone, gave Karen a look that could cut steel. Karen stammered something incoherent before retreating to her house, slamming the door behind her. The officers, thoroughly embarrassed, apologized profusely. We're sorry, Captain, one of them said, his voice shaky. You can tell dispatch this was a baseless call, Jeremy said curtly, turning back toward his family. And next time, maybe think twice before assuming guilt based on the color of someone's skin. The officers nodded and hurried back to their car, leaving the Wilsons to continue their BBQ, though the laughter carried a new edge of defiance. As for Karen, the silence from her house spoke volumes. But one thing was clear. Riverside Heights would never be the same. By this time, the commotion had drawn the attention of other neighbors, many of whom had stepped outside. Amelia, ever the strategist, had started recording the encounter on her phone. Look, Captain, we're just responding to a call, one officer stammered. And now I'm responding, Jeremy said, his voice calm but firm. You can tell dispatch the call was baseless. Meanwhile, Karen, realizing she was being filmed, began sputtering. I didn't mean any harm. I was just concerned. Concerned about what? Amelia cut in. A family enjoying their backyard? Or is it that you're not used to seeing a black family in your perfect little bubble? The crowd murmured in agreement, and a few neighbors began filming as well. Karen looked around nervously. Amelia uploaded the video to social media with the caption, When your racist neighbor calls the cops on your family BBQ, but forgets your husband is a police captain. Within hours, the video went viral. Comments poured in, condemning Karen's actions and praising the Wilsons for their composure. By the next morning, Karen's name and face were all over the internet. She became the subject of national outrage, with hashtags like #KarenBBQ trending online. Local news picked up the story, and Karen's phone was flooded with calls from reporters. Meanwhile, Jeremy used the incident as an opportunity to address deeper issues. During a press conference, he said, "This wasn't just about my family. It's about the assumptions that black people don't belong in certain spaces. We belong. Period." Karen, facing intense backlash, issued a half-hearted apology, but it was clear her reputation in Riverside Heights was shattered. On the other hand, the Wilsons were warmly embraced by many of their neighbors who had initially been silent. The HOA even invited Jeremy to join their board, hoping to repair the neighborhood's image. Jeremy, with a wry smile, accepted. "Change starts from within," he said. As for Karen, her house was soon up for sale. Riverside Heights wasn't quite the sanctuary she'd imagined anymore. And the Wilson family? Their backyard BBQs became the talk of the neighborhood, a symbol of resilience, justice, and a delicious reminder that no one can grill like Captain Wilson.